My experience was of a family meeting in where I was an observer as a social work student on placement. Social work led the meeting, they chaired the meeting, with a medical team present, nursing staff present, occupational therapy present, and every team had its own student, 3 family members and the patient themselves. It was a very crowded meeting in a very small room. The patient came in and felt intimidated. She also felt we had already made up our minds, just as she had, and her determination was that she would move back home, and ours was that she would move to residential aged care. The meeting went well. It was chaired well. However, I do believe a little preparation would have gone a long way, and a lot of reflection on this has enabled me to see that. Using Gardner's model of critical reflection, in stage 1 where I explored my reaction, I found that the context had significant meaning for me due to my family having a history with death in a residential aged care facility and a death of a family member in the home. I guess this sort of rang true, and so my internal feelings were often conflicting. Externally though, being in the room as a professional, I had to not express my internal feelings. The meaning from this that I took away was that self-determination, duty of care are often conflicting, that sometimes it's not as clear-cut and ethical dilemmas do arise. When I looked at what other reactions there could be, I was looking primarily on how the patient would have felt. She'd lived in her home for many years and her husband had passed away, but her children were raised there. She didn't see her time in hospital as an issue. She saw that she was at home more than hospital. Her reactions were that the whole setting was very intimidating. That we didn't want her opinion and that we wouldn't listen to her choices. Upon the end of the meeting, she made it obvious that her mind wouldn't be changed and that she would fight any decision made. The meaning for me was that the patient felt her rights of quality of life were being removed, not only by the treating team, but also her children. And this was significant. Looking at new understandings and perceptions, it made me understand how advocating on behalf of the patient with their views and their concerns was very important, especially when it's an interdisciplinary team. Understanding how my reactions impacted as a social worker also allows me to manage them, and the professionalism required in this field comes from that understanding of how I react to situations. With meaning, the loss of choice in the aged is similar to the lack of choice in children. But I saw from this case that it's unacceptable, and unless there is risk of harm, not necessary. However, I only saw one side of the story. So, how did reflecting on this case change how I felt and give me greater understanding? It made me actually identify my feelings. It made me identify my assumptions. What I hold dear to me, my values, my beliefs, and how these can create biases in practice. It gave me a place to evaluate challenging and significant experiences. And it gave me an understanding where when I took it back to supervision later on, I was able to express myself clearly. It also gave me an understanding of working in an interdisciplinary team and how the theories differ between practices. Moving on to stage 2, and what difference will this understanding make? I believe after looking at the entire case that I'd allow more time for preparation as we were given very little. I'd acknowledge if changes are required to make the experience more acceptable for the patient, ask how many students were going to be present, and see if we could reduce the number. I'd also acknowledge the different theoretical backgrounds of members of the interdisciplinary team, as the medical staff come from a biomedical model, which often doesn't take into account the social constructs that social workers work from. It doesn't have the flexibility to adapt to the changes the way social work models do, and it appears very oppressive when presented. How I would now see things differently, I definitely understand theoretical perspectives better than I did before. I understand how different models can either complement each other or work against each other. And I can understand the need for a medical model to appear oppressive. They have times frames and schedules, but I'm also aware that as a social worker, we work from the anti-oppressive practice models. And I believe better preparation may have enabled us to explain what was going on to the patient a little clearer so that the medical model didn't intimidate her in the long run. It also gave me time to view the environment from the patient's perspective, and I could see adjustments needed to be made. How would I seek to influence other people involved? I think with the time constraints we'd found, my biggest thing would be to make sure the time was spent to build rapport with the patient, and to explain the processes and to get a better understanding of her needs and her wishes. To liaise with the other disciplines prior to the meeting to see how they were going to present, and to see how many students were going to be present. Have some more preparation in regards to the room, the environment, the seating arrangements, and just making sure there weren't too many people impacting on the space, as it did get quite congested and a lot of people didn't actually have a role. How would I seek to influence the organisation? Advocacy. Advocate for change of the protocol on family meetings, where social work always chairs the meeting. Social work hadn't called this meeting, yet social work chaired it. And I found it didn't allow for correct preparation time. I'd liaise more with other disciplines about the theoretical understandings and implications, how the social work models can interact with the biomedical models used. I'd also talk more with other disciplines on the least restrictive options, because if it goes further than the hospital, they have to have been explored before it goes to VCAT or any other body that can make a decision. How would I seek to influence the social context? This was a harder one for me. I believe more education to the family, to the patient, Start slow, work big, hopefully it spreads. Residential aged care has often had a stigma attached to it, and possibly you could say a bad name. So providing education, providing options, giving people informed choices and explaining the processes clearly would assist in making choices correctly. And then explaining least restrictive options and services available to achieve these. What difference will this understanding make? I hope the next time I come across a similar situation that I wouldn't have the same conflict internally that I had this time. I felt it clouded my judgment. And if I had been the social worker, I don't think I would have been able to perform as well as I needed. It would also clear my mind to effectively advocate for the patient's values and beliefs, and hopefully prior preparation I'd know more about what these were. Assumptions were a hard one, as I found throughout the observation that my assumptions changed. My assumptions to begin with were regarding age. By the end, they were regarding self-determination. What feelings and thoughts would I be more likely to have now? After bringing this up in supervision, theory has become a big part of this experience for me. The biomedical model used by the practitioners is due to bed numbers and keeping the patients flowing through the hospital. In the social work environment, we like anti-oppressive practices, and sometimes this conflicts with the biomedical model, which can appear very oppressive in practice. I guess my thoughts would be trying to find a way to meld the two so they don't come across as occasionally conflicting. What difference will this understanding make? In my own context, it's the significant aha moment that put theory and practice on the same page, and I could relate one to the other. I could suddenly see critical theory in use. I could see anti-oppressive practice. I could see strengths focuses, and I understood how they finally fit. And discussing it further in supervision later on gave me an understanding of how these can still work in a systems environment. So systems theory came into play. It really was a fantastic learning experience for me to be able to discuss theories and find out how they fit into practice. How would I understand the influence of context in the organisation? Being in Bendigo House was a fantastic experience, but really opened up my thoughts and my assumptions that I previously had on systems. Delving into systems theory the way I have over the past 14 weeks has allowed me to understand that systems aren't structured in a way there's no flexibility, but it's more upon how they work together, how we can identify all the different systems at play in a patient's life. And I've worked with many systems with many patients now. The context in the general social culture is an interesting one. I had to think hard. Residential aged care facilities have had a stigma for many years. I can't fully define the stigma, but often it's seen as an end of life. Once you're put into an aged care facility, you weren't going to leave unless it was at your funeral. In the media lately, there's been a lot of focus on aged care facilities. And due to this, it has now been announced that there will be a Royal Commission into aged care quality and safety. Hopefully this will alleviate the stigma that's associated with residential aged care facilities. And if the issues that were assumed are found factual, that these would be addressed. What difference will this make in my understanding, and how would I connect this to experience that matter to me? For this one, family comes first. So dealing with a patient who was having her rights taken away and was going to move to an aged care facility, it conflicted me in the sense that I did take care of my father, but then I shouldn't put my assumptions on everyone. Everyone's lives are different. And through supervision, this assisted me in dealing with that. It also made me understand the importance of advocacy and then understanding the systems and frameworks that are there, including the informal systems of support, because it was these systems that had broken down and the need for care was required. The difference the understanding will make for me is understanding how my family values will impact my assumptions that I may place on others, and that no two families are alike and no two families are going to be impacted by the same systems. So no two stories will ever be the same. I need to recognise this and not place my assumptions on others. I'm a strong believer in the right to self-determination, and for this, the fact that capacity was being discussed by the medical team, it brought up conflicting emotions within myself, and I need to understand that as a social worker, I don't have to address capacity. That is primarily a medical point of view. And I also need to be conscious of other age, race, gender and religion assumptions. Throughout the reflection process, I did find it hard identifying my assumptions, and I realised this was due to them changing as frequently as my knowledge and experience on the topic changed. A lot of my learning came from excellent supervision I was given and the freedom to discuss theories and systems and assumptions and have my assumptions challenged in such a safe environment. And then we delve deeper into why I assumed what I assume. And then, as I couldn't always understand how my assumptions would impact others, we discussed how it may. And I now understand that if I assume older people come from a different era and haven't kept up with the times, well, I could be incorrect. They might have all the mod cons at home, and they may also have all the systems in place to be able to remain in the home. Unfortunately for the client that we were seeing in this particular scenario, she didn't have access to all the modern equipment and she wouldn't allow people in to help her, hence it having a challenging outcome. The critical reflection process allowed for greater understanding of how everything fit together. It highlighted values, beliefs. It was a basic model that we used in our supervision, as my supervisor was familiar with Gardner's model of critical reflection. It's not my preferred model, as I find it difficult to negotiate, and it wasn't until placement I fully understood the process behind it. However, it has given me a basis for dealing with ethical dilemmas and challenging experiences whilst on placement. So I've gained an understanding of theory from it, systems from it, where I sit with my beliefs and values. And I guess my biggest learning now is how to make those assumptions not impact on my work with clients. That I have determined self-determination is valuable for me, but if I inflict my assumptions on others, that's contradictory in itself. So my thoughts is critical reflection plays a significant role in social work. However, I believe Gardner's model isn't the model for me. Thank you.